that are here and the ones, because that's the best way to honor the ones that are not with us, is to go on, to kind of do things as if they are with us. You know what I mean? Like not to stop, because life doesn't stop, and unfortunately we don't control it. And that's really the big point to kind of to take home. And it takes time. Honestly, it takes time. Obviously, as you know, of course, as you see, you've lost people that you've known, and look, it's never easy. And it just comes to the point of managing those emotions and then coming to the point of acceptance and moving on. You're never the same. You're never the same, because piece of that person that you've lost kind of gets lost as well. In other words, a piece of your soul kind of disappears. But guess what? I think all of us are kind of strong, and we kind of find a way to accept it. We know we don't control it. Nothing we can do about it. So we move on. We choose to go on. Of
Thank you. And
course.
for the people, and you know who you are because I take those phone calls, I answer those texts who have lost family members this last couple of weeks. We are sending you, or this year, we are sending you our deepest, deepest condolences. Mike and I wanted to address this because it's a real reality for many people. There are many, many people who are going to be sitting down missing the ones that they love. And we want to honor that. Mike, I would like to ask you two more questions. How important is it to learn to say no?
Oh
People
my God.
don't do that. I learned that lesson years ago that it is okay to say no, and I say no to things now. How important is it to say no and not feel guilty about it?
Oh my God, it's probably one of the most important things. Something I'm still working on, believe it or not. And I tell people that it's important, and I should be telling myself as well. Sometimes I have a problem saying no in many situations. Why? Because you have a conflicting
Mhm.
feeling inside that you do wanna do something or help someone or do whatever you can. As I said, it's a question of setting boundaries, and it's a question of self-care as well. In other words, I think we take our um, you know, utmost desire and utmost effort to help someone. But if sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes you kind of want to kind of basically go back and say, well, what are my options? Can I really help? And can I really say yes to a situation? And is it going to be really hurtful? It's going to have hurtful consequences to me, and it's a difficult thing. How important is it? Oh my God, I think it's the most important, because I think a lot of times we get overextended, and that's actually what leads to that anxiety and overwhelming feeling that we spoke about before. I think it's incredibly important, and I think it's something that most people don't know how to do a lot of times because of that conflicting feeling. And a lot of times people perceive it differently. People will perceive it like, well, you don't want to help me, you don't want to say yes, when I expect you to say yes. But then the question becomes, well, you can't be everywhere at the same time. You cannot help everyone at the same time. At certain times you have to create those boundaries. And I think when it comes to self-care, it's so important. And it's a big skill to learn. I'll tell you, I'm still, as I said, I'm still working on it myself. A lot of times I say yes to five different situations, and then I realize I can't do it. And you kind of end up hurting yourself, and also you also hurt each of those five in this example, because you can't really fully dedicate yourself to everything you have to do. I think it's highly important to be able to say yes and to say no when you'd like to say yes, in other words, and decide, be more decisive and kind of focus on the end result, so to speak, and say, well, I can do three things out of five, and probably do them better, and also remain not so anxious myself, and remain fully committed to this and be in better space myself. So it's a complex issue,
But it's
very complex
important,
issue.
right? It's important so people
But
don't
yeah.
feel guilty using that word. Okay, so
Oh
I'm gonna
yeah.
ask you one more question.
I think you're dealing with that as well, I'm sure, because people come to you for help all the time, and people ask you to say yes, and you are probably more than often you're inclined to say yes, and sometimes you have to face the fact that you're a human being, and you can only do so much, right?
Right, that's correct.
Sure.
Um, so one of the most interesting personalities I studied, and this applies to the holidays because people are going to go home and have this personality in the house, is a narcissistic personality. And I dropped below a book that changed everything for me. Everybody has narcissists in their family that they've dealt with them. So this book changed everything. So I put it below. How do you deal with that personality? What are the tips when it comes to dealing with that personality? People are going to go home. They're going home to family members who are narcissistic. How do you do? And we know what a complex and how
Yeah.
involved. What are two tips you could pass on?
I'll tell you, it's a really it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. When you say deal with, so there's two ways I kind of say, well, do you want to confront the narcissism in the person? Do you want to really just kind of deal with it to the point where you remain untouched, so to speak, by that narcissism. I think the best way to deal with a narcissist is not to really allow them to affect you one way or the other. Is really, I kind of always say not to engage and not to really get influenced and not to get too close to that narcissistic trait, almost to ignore it to some degree, because usually it comes out in one way or the other through their behavior, through their desire for recognition, their desire for being acknowledged and being put in a certain place. So I think the idea is to kind of keep things neutral
Mhm.
and not to really feed into the narrative that narcissists typically push and promote. And this, so you kind of want to. I always tell people, and I think my view is not always academically the same as a lot of people will suggest, because a lot of times people will suggest confrontation. A lot of times people will suggest a lack of acknowledgement and so on and so forth. I typically choose to remain neutral and always kind of say, well, the best idea in my view is not to engage them and to really just kind of like stick to the acknowledge but not go with it and kind of keep things on a very, very neutral playing field where they don't feel completely rejected, but at the same time they don't feel completely acknowledged and justified in expressing their narcissism. Um, it's a tough one. It's a tough one because when you mention the holidays, think about it. When you're talking about a lot of different personalities coming together, and let's say it's a holiday family gathering, any kind of gathering where people get together, you have so many different personalities. And as I said, narcissists will be, there's always one or two or more that are present. The idea is to let them kind of be and let them express themselves as much as they want to, not necessarily to confront them, but more or less to ignore their traits and to just really continue with the fun. And I was always kind of advocate for emotional balance and emotional regulation. And to me, that a big part of it is to control myself and not necessarily try to really control other people. When I say that, so I say, well, okay, well, am I emotionally balanced? And if that person is a narcissist and he exhibits certain traits of a narcissist, and that obviously comes out in behavior and his speech, his or her speech, I can either be triggered and I can deal with it, or I can just really focus on myself and my own, reaction to it and control that. And I think that kind of takes away the power of a narcissist from the perspective of, doing anything to me, good or bad or what. If that person is who he or she is, it's not my, especially around the holidays, it's not really my job to confront or deal with them. And I would just kind of say, remain emotionally regulated, emotionally balanced, continue on and enjoy life, especially around the holidays. Like, as you said, there's so many pressures. And a lot of times, you remember, I'm sorry I'm going on. I can talk about
No,
this.
this is one. I know. Honestly,
Talk
man, I
about
think
this
it's
all day long. And
great.
I
No,
deal with them all the time. And
yeah, it's wonderful advice.